A secret for two. Percy was a milkman. He worked for a milk company in the Montreal city of Canada. He was one of the many wagon drivers that worked for the company. For 30 years, Percy had delivered milk to the families living on Edward Street in Montreal. The horse which drew Percy's milk wagon was a large, white horse. It was named Joseph and had been with Percy for the past 15 years. When the big white horse first came to the company, he didn't have a name. They told Percy that he could use the white horse for his wagon. Percy stroked the horse's neck and looked into his eyes. "This is a nice horse," he said. "I'll name him Joseph." Within a year, Joseph knew the milk route as well as Percy did. Percy used to say that he didn't need reins to guide the horse. "I never touched them," he would say proudly. Each morning he arrived at the company at 5 o'clock. The wagon would be loaded with bottles of milk, and Joseph hitched to it. "Go on, my friend," Percy would say softly to Joseph. Then the two would move proudly towards Edward Street. The horse would go trotting lightly, and Percy would call to him in loving names. The milk wagon, without any direction from Percy, would arrive at Edward Street. The horse would stop at the first house. He would allow Percy about a minute to get down from his seat and hand over a bottle of milk at the front door. Again the horse would go on. He would skip 2 houses and stop at the third. Thus, the two would go down the length of the street. At the end of the street, Joseph would turn around and come back along the other side. He was really a very smart horse. At the company, Percy would boast of Joseph's skill. "I never touched the reins," he would say. "Joseph knows just where to stop. Even a blind man could do my job with Joseph pulling the wagon." So it went on for years. Percy and Joseph grew old together. But gradually, not suddenly. Percy's huge moustaches were pure white now, and Joseph, too, didn't lift his knees so high when he went on his round every morning. Jack, the foreman of the company, never noticed this change. He never noticed that both Percy and Joseph were getting old. But one day he was surprised to see Percy with a big walking stick. "Hey, Percy," said the foreman. "What do I see there? Maybe you have got gout." "I don't know what it is," said Percy. "But as one grows old, legs get tired very soon." "You should teach the horse to hand over the milk bottles to your customers," Jack said with a smile. "He does everything else for you." One morning, the manager of the milk company came to inspect the morning deliveries. Pointing towards Percy, Jack said, "Sir, look there. See how Percy is talking to that horse whom he calls Joseph. See how the horse is listening intently. Look how he has turned his head towards Percy. See the look in the horse's eyes. I think the two have a secret. Sometimes they seem to chuckle at us when they go off on their route in the morning. Percy is a good man, but he is getting old. Don't you think he should be retired and given a small pension?" "You're right," said the manager. "Percy has been on this route now for 30 years. Not even once has there been a complaint against him. Tell him it is time he should retire and have rest. His salary will go on just the same." But Percy didn't want to retire. He couldn't bear the thought of not driving Joseph every day. He said to Jack, "We are 2 old men, me and Joseph. Let me and him wear out together. When Joseph is ready to retire, I too will leave." Jack understood Percy's feelings. There was something about Percy and Joseph which made one smile tenderly. It was as if each drew some hidden strength from the other. When Percy was sitting on his seat with Joseph hitched to the wagon, neither seemed old, but when they finished their work, Percy would limp down the street painfully. He seemed very old indeed. Joseph, too, would drop his head and walk wearily to his stall. Then one morning, Jack had dreadful news for Percy. He said, "Percy, there is bad news. Joseph did not wake this morning. He was very old. You knew, Percy, he was 25, and that is like 75 for a man." "Yes," said Percy sadly. "I am 75 now. My poor Joseph, I shall never see him again." Jack patted Percy on the shoulder. "Don't worry, Percy," he said. "We'll find you another horse, just as good as Joseph. In a month's time you will teach him your route, then you will—" But he stopped when he looked into Percy's eyes. For years, Percy had worn a heavy cap. The peak of his cap came low over his eyes. Now when Jack looked into Percy's eyes, he saw something which startled him. He saw in them a dead, lifeless look. They were mirroring the grief in Percy's heart. "Take today off, Percy," Jack said. But before Jack could complete his sentence, Percy was already limping down the street. Tears were streaming down his cheeks and he was sobbing. There was a loud horn from the driver of a truck coming fast from the opposite side. And then there was the scream of brakes. But it appeared that Percy had heard neither. 5 minutes later, an ambulance doctor said, "He's dead." Jack and many of the milk wagon drivers had arrived at the spot. They looked down at the still figure. "What could I do?" said the truck driver apologetically. "He walked straight into my truck. Surely he didn't see it. He walked into it as though he were blind." The ambulance doctor bent down and looked into Percy's eyes. "Blind?" he said. "Of course, the man was blind. See those cataracts? He must have been blind for 5 years at least." Then he turned to Jack and said, "You say he worked for your company. Didn't you know he was blind?" "No," said Jack softly. "None of us knew. There was only one who knew it. A friend of his named Joseph. I think it was a secret between those two only."